not reluctant. I'm just watching out for the last minute gaps. I said I wasn't going to do this alone. I need the concurrence of the president of ANI. Let me turn to him. President of ANI, sir. Are you sure you want to receive them?
I'm ready to receive them. You can say I'll put my finger up now.
A round of applause. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. I have the honor of conferring on all of you, the membership of the National Institute, Corridor.
Graduates, please be seated. Let us proceed. Please get seated, graduates. You are still graduates. I take that back. With your kind permission, Your Excellency, I will now call out their names in alphabetical order to come up to the stage to receive their certificates. Beginning with number 1. Control, please show the slide. Ahmed Abba, Mr. General Manager, sponsored by the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority. Please, a round of applause. He was also the treasurer of the Senior Executive Course 44. Next is Abubakar Fatima Gwandu, barrister, Deputy Chief Registrar, sponsored by the Court of Appeal of Nigeria. Encourage her, please. Adebayo Fari Folashade, Mrs. General Managing Director, sponsored by the National Council of Women's Societies. Aderoba Adebayo Taufik, comrade, Depot Manager, Deputy National President of the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, and the Financial Secretary of the SEC. Ajayi Ebenezer Adeyeye, Mr. Project Coordinator, sponsored by the Presidency. Akinkumi Oladipo Benedict, Mr. Director, I jumped one. Akingbasote Oluwagbenga Samuel Mayokun, Mr. Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Ondo State Government. Akinkumi Oladipo Benedict, Mr. Director, sponsored by the Department of State Services. Akintola Kolawale Najim, Mr. Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Osun State Government. Alaro Abdulrazak Abdul Majid, Professor of Law, sponsored by the Presidency. Al Hassan Abubakar Sadiq, Doctor, Director, sponsored by the Department of State Services. Ali Jallo Ibrahim, Mr. Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Gombe State Government. Ali Mikena Patrick Oshoke, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Anka Yushau Karimatu, Doctor, Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Zamfara State Government. Aliyu Mohammed Sani, Architect, Rector, sponsored by the Waziri Umaru Federal Polytechnic, Birnin Kebbi. Arungwa Mwazwe Udo, Commissioner of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force, and the Sports Officer of the SEC. Ayeni Afolayan, Comptroller, sponsored by the Nigeria Immigration Service. Ayuba Haruna Rekia Tanko, Barrister, Honorable Commissioner, sponsored by the Presidency. Baju Aishetu Abubakar, Assistant Inspector General of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force, and the first female Monitor General of Senior Executive 44, 2022, and the entire history of the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. Congratulations. Bako Ayebusi Ladidi Kuluwa, Director, sponsored by the Federal Ministry of Health and the Assistant Secretary General of the course. Balakefi Ladi Raulatu, Doctor, Head Macroeconomic Unit at the Central Bank of Nigeria. Her PhD was confirmed while on course. Balogun Shagun, Mr., Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer, sponsored by the Chartered Insurance Institute of Nigeria. Bello Abubakar Adamu, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army and the Security Officer of the SEC. Bukar Hassan Mesiyama, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Danladi Abdullahi Abu, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Dogo Stephen Jacob, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Ebong Eibio, Commissioner of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force. Faka Anna Nanchin Christopher, Mrs., General Manager, sponsored by the National Universities Commission. Garba Raphael Adebola, Group Captain, sponsored by the Nigerian Air Force. Gonji Cookball Dado, Corps Commander, sponsored by the Federal Road Safety Corps. Gyang Florence Dung, Brigadier General retired, sponsored by the Presidency. Ibrahim Manir Talba Alaji, Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Katsina State Government. Ibrahim Salihu, Colonel, sponsored by the Defense Intelligence Agency. Idumu Mosumola Abiodun, Mrs., General Manager, sponsored by the Nigerian Meteorological Agency. Ihua Ugusi Belema, Professor, Executive Director, sponsored by the Presidency. Ikenwewe Ugochukwu Patrick, Director, sponsored by the Department of State Services. Ilyasu Mohammed Ide, Mr., Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Nasarawa State Government. Issa Ado Disa, Brigadier General, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. I beg your pardon, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Jinadu Oluwafemi Abiodun, Mr., Director, sponsored by the Defense Intelligence Agency. Kabir Mohammed Maman, Surveyor, Registrar and Chief Executive Officer, sponsored by the Surveyors Council of Nigeria. Katsayal Umar Adam, Professor. We call him the SEC herbalist, sponsored by the Presidency. Kazim Abdulrazak Olakbeju, Colonel, sponsored by the Office of the National Security Advisor. Basaba Lazarus Istifanus, Ambassador, sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He was promoted ambassador while on course. Kupan Amos Danlami, Doctor, Controller of Corrections, sponsored by the Nigeria Correctional Service. Lawal Badru Banji, Commissioner of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force. Ma'aji Mohammed Al-Hassan, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Mahmoud Bashir, Surveyor, Director, sponsored by the Federal Capital Development Authority. Megeri Peter Pirinkwap, Reverend Father, Rector, sponsored by the Plateau State Government. Mba Frank Emeka, Commissioner of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force. Mohammed Adamu Mohammed, Navy Captain, sponsored by the Nigerian Navy. Mohammed Kamal Mr. Comptroller, sponsored by the Nigeria Customs Service. Mohammed Madaki Abdul, Mr. Director, sponsored by the Investments and Securities Tribunal. Mohammed Murtala Yahaya, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Mohammed Umar Khalifa, Doctor, sponsored by the Presidency while on course. Or confirmed director, actually. Nathan Nancy Sabanchi, Director, sponsored by the Federal Capital Territory Administration. Ngama Ifeanyi Jude, Engineer, sponsored by the Presidency and the ICT Guru of Sec 44. Nadi Dera Ansem, Comptroller, sponsored by the Nigeria Customs Service. Nwajuba Augusta Chinyere, Professor, sponsored by the National Universities Commission. Obi Emeka Vitalis, Doctor, Director, sponsored by the State House, Abuja. Obi Yinka Omoniyi, Sunday, Chief, Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer, sponsored by the Presidency. Odo Cletus Okuchukwu, Mr. Director, sponsored by the Association of National Accountants of Nigeria. Odo Wadimpa Cosmas, Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer, sponsored by the Presidency. Ofurumazi Cyril Yinsoyi Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Ogbona Kelechi Kingsley, Navy Captain, sponsored by the Nigerian Navy. Ogidon Steve Olusegun, Doctor, Chief Executive Officer and Consultant, sponsored by the Presidency. Ojelabi David Idowu, Commandant, sponsored by the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps. Oke Uche Ninikanwa Olachi, Mrs., Director, sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Deputy Monitor General of Senior Executive Course 44, 2022. Okwegu Pius Ugochukwu, Group Captain, sponsored by the Nigerian Air Force. Olatunji Latif Ademola, Doctor, Rector, sponsored by the National Board for Technical Education. Onwuhafua LC Udwak, PhD, Chief Veterinary Surgeon, sponsored by the Nigerian Defense Academy. Oyenuga Adewale Bamidele, Pharmacist, Managing Director, CEO, sponsored by the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria. Quadri Babatunde Usman, Navy Captain, sponsored by the Nigerian Navy and the illustrious Rapporteur General for Senior Executive Course 44, 2022. He distinguished himself in that role. Ramnap Lawyer Joyce, Right Honorable, sponsored by the Presidency, and the Welfare Officer of the SEC. Sadiq Idris Abubakar, Commissioner of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force. Saidu Umar, Group Navy Captain, sponsored by the Nigerian Navy. Sambo Bello Jaji, Mr., Director, sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Sawyer Wisdom Ebie, Doctor and Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Bayelsa State Government. Sekego Stephen Paul, Group Captain, sponsored by the Nigerian Air Force. He was the course dissident. Suleiman Amuda Yusuf, Commissioner of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force. Tijani Usman, Engineer, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, sponsored by the Nigerian Society of Engineers. Tukur Rekia Mrs., Director, sponsored by the Presidency. Ugoji Chukudi Edwin, Colonel, sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Ujam Chukwemeka, Honorable Doctor, Consultant and Politician, sponsored by the Presidency. Umar Musa Emmanuel, Doctor, Senior Fellow, sponsored by the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, Son of the Soil. Usman Abdulkadir Kadei, Mr., Director, sponsored by the Northeast Development Commission. Usman Kamoru Olaiwola, Professor, Provost, sponsored by the National Commission for Colleges of Education. Winful Ozavize, Director, sponsored by the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Yahaya Sahabu Abubakar, Assistant Inspector General of Police, sponsored by the Nigeria Police Force. And lastly, Your Excellency, but by no means the least, Yahaya Mohammed Yakubu, I beg your pardon, let me take that again. Yakubu Mohammed Bello, Doctor, Permanent Secretary, sponsored by the Niger State Government. He also distinguished himself while on the course.
All right, let's put our hands together for the graduates of Senior Executive Course 44. Congratulations, everybody. Congratulations to every one of you. We have come to a very important part of this very serious ceremony, which is the induction of all the graduates of Senior Executive Course 44 into the Alumni Association of the National Institute. And to lead us in taking this induction, we have the President of ANI, in the person of the Inspector General of Police, retired, MD Abubakar MNI, and other executives of ANI also present in the house. May we invite the executives of ANI to please come to the podium? Thank you. To conduct the induction of SEC 44 participants into the Alumni Association of the National Institute. Let's appreciate them with a round of applause. Let's put our hands together as they come forward. Let's encourage them. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, Your Excellency, the representative of Governor of Plateau State, DG National Institute, the interim chairman of board and board members, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, graduates. Because don't put the pin because you have not been sworn in. Please don't put the pin. It's now my honor and privilege on behalf of the executive and all members of the National Institute to welcome you to this very prestigious, legalized cult of Nigeria. Congratulations.
Do swear solemnly Association of National Institute. I would at all times observe, respect, protect, defend, and devote myself to the said Constitution. So help me God.
Let's conclude the decorations quickly so that we can move on. Can you please take your seats? Can you please take your seats, please? Can we clear the aisle? May I request that we please take our seats immediately, all graduates? Let's be seated. Thank you. Let's be seated, please. Thank you. Before we move on to the next item on the agenda, can we please be seated? Before we move on to the next item on the agenda, the next item on the program, permit me to recognize a few other people who are here to grace this occasion. Let me recognize the presence in the house this morning of the Secretary to the Plateau State Government, Professor Danladi Atu. Can we put our hands together for him? Professor Danladi Atu. Also present in this house this morning, we have the Honorable Commissioner for Physical Planning in Plateau State, and that is Honorable Peter Akuja. Please put your hands together. Honorable Peter Akuja is here. Honorable Commissioner for Physical Planning, Plateau State. Let's clear the aisles. It is not yet time for photographs. You can do that after the event. Thank you. Also present this morning with us is the Honorable Commissioner for Secondary Education in the person of Honorable Mrs. Elizabeth Wapmuk. Let's put our hands together for her. And then we have the Chairman of the Christian Association of Nigeria, Plateau State, Reverend Father Polycarp Lubey. We have here, ladies and gentlemen, the National Vice President of NASIMA, that's the National Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industry, Mines, and Agriculture, Dr. Bala Mahmoud Abubakar. You are welcome. Thank you for coming. Let me also recognize the Deputy Controller General of Correctional Services, Sylvester Nwankwekwe. That is, he's representing the Controller General of Nigerian Correctional Services. Thank you. We also have DCM Joshua Fanola MNI, who is here to represent the Acting Corps Marshal FRSC. Please put your hands together for him. Also here this afternoon, we have the Provost, Federal College of Land Resources, Technology, Kuru, Dr. Ademola Raji, who is represented by the Registrar, Mr. Rap Ruben. A round of applause for him, please. And then, of course, we have a representative of the President of the Chartered Institute of Taxation, Chief Adeshino Adedayo, MNI. Please put your hands together for him. Thank you. A few more before we go on. There is also a representative of the President of the Nigerian Institution of Estate Surveyors and Valuers, We have here Malam Bature Ali Mohammed, who is the second vice president of the institution. Please put your hands together to appreciate him for coming. And then we have, finally, but certainly not the least, we have the zonal director of the Nigerian Television Authority, who is here to represent the Director General of NTA. Please put your hands together for him. All right, so very quickly we'll be going straight to the address by the special guest of honor, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, ably represented this afternoon by the Minister of Transportation, the Honorable Minister of Transportation, Muazu Jaji Sambo. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together as he comes forward to deliver his remarks.
Your Excellency, the Executive Governor of Plateau State, Right Honorable Barrister Simon Bakola Long, ably represented today by the Deputy Governor, Professor Sonny Tioden. Your Excellencies, other state governors, distinguished senators, honorable members of the House of Representatives, honorable members of the Federal and State Executive Council, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and high commissioners, the chairman and members of Board of Governors of the National Institute, service chiefs and Inspector General of Police, heads of paramilitary services, Director General and Management of the National Institute, Directors General, and other chief executives of sister federal parastatals, our royal fathers, the General